here we are.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year, Joe.
Happy New Year.
Scott, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's all going to go down in 2023. This is the year. This is our year. I mean, this is when we make the world great again.
And who is our?
WGW.
Make the world great again. Okay, what? That doesn't roll off the tongue. No, you'll never top MAGA.
MAGA? Well, we can start with MAGA. Let's make America great again. That's the first order of business. It's going to happen this year.
You think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Come on. It's over. It's over.
No,
Give it up, Joe. Give up the ghost.
It depends what you mean by making it great again.
Okay. What do you mean
see,
by?
you have to be precise in what when someone says something like that, you have to say, well, what do you mean by make it great again? You can't just assume that means what you think it means, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to make America great again, in my opinion, America would have to be changed.
For the better.
Well, yeah, obviously making it great again implies that it's going to be better, but
okay.
it applies significant change.
Are we talking about revolution?
Just some major change.
Okay.
But the final outcome is that America has been made great again. If it ever was great, I suppose you could say it was great, but at a certain point in time. But to make it great again, it has to go through a significant amount of change.
Well, you began by saying
Now, if what?
This would happen globally. Well,
Well, we start with America.
Yeah.
You said make the world great again. I said, well, and you said that won't top MAGA, make America great again. And I said, well, we'll start with America.
And its influence is such that it will affect the whole world.
Well, it always does, doesn't it?
Okay. So, yeah, okay. But you're talking about a Biden administration? No.
Huh?
Who's going to make America great again, therefore the world? Biden? Joe Biden? No.
It'll just happen naturally.
Okay, so you're talking about circumstances.
Mm.
What kind of circumstances are we thinking of?
Well, when you have a...
Inadvertent consequences.
I mean, for example...
Not even intentional.
Like when you change your house
Uh-huh.
to make it great again. Say your house has fallen into disrepair.
Right.
And you want to make it great again, like it used to be when you bought it.
Mm.
But it's fallen into such disrepair that it needs extensive renovation.
And
Up to and including knocking some walls down.
And
So
the
that's-
temporary relocation of its inhabitants.
Maybe. So the process of making America great again does not preclude the idea of there being some kind of radical restructuring.
Okay. Come on. This is all metaphor, so...
Not really, no.
What are you thinking?
No.
Economic collapse?
President John Bolton.
President John Bolton.
Well, that can only be
The
next year. That can't be this year.
The mustachioed one. Yeah, that's next year. No, I'm kind of... It's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I think there's pretty significant things going to go down this year in America. For example, consider... don't listen to me. Take it from the great Orange Man himself. After recent events in the American Congress, as quoted by Marjorie Taylor Greene, Donald J. Trump said, "It's looking very good for the Republican Party and our country tonight. All coming together. Mwahahaha. Stay tuned." Trump's plan is all coming together. He's kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi. You know? Do you know the story? That story in Star Wars? Scotty knows the story of Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, obviously. But the basic gist is that Obi-Wan, sacrificed himself, and in the sacrificing of himself, you thought that was the end, that it was over, that it was done. That the dark side had won. But in fact, by sacrificing himself, he had actually achieved that which he couldn't achieve while he was alive, which was the rise of the Jedi and the destruction of the Empire.
Right. Are you suggesting Trump is Obi-Wan Kenobi?
Yes, pretty much. Although he didn't die physically, he did take political death. But as he says in that tweet there, it's all coming together. Stay tuned. So
What do you think he's getting at then?
his
Come on, spell it out.
well, it's kind of obvious, no?
No, I
Hi-
haven't a clue.
No, his agenda that he was unable to achieve while he was in
There he is.
There he is. There, you see, somebody already had the idea. His agenda that he was attempting to achieve while in an office, but was prevented from doing so, is being achieved by his, after he's gone. Or he thinks that it will be achieved after he's gone, basically. That he has his time in office left a legacy that will, in time, bear fruit.
Oh, okay. So Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Greene, Jim Jordan,
Lauren
But
Boebert or whatever. her name is.
Boebert, but they're only 20. I look at that numbers and go, I look at it from the other side. You see the glass half full, I see it half empty. I look at it and go, after all of this, from 2016 to today, all the American people have to show are 20 representatives on their side versus 400 and whatever the rest are on the elite side. And it's kind of pathetic, no? They have 300 and some million people have 20 representatives, and the other 20 million have all the others. But Trump's suggesting, or you're suggesting, that just having those 20 is going to change the whole agenda this year. It's going to result in legislation passed in Congress.
Well, it's not only 20. That's kind of a bit oversimplified. I mean, if you look at, this is another one from Marjorie Taylor Greene, just the other day, yesterday. Republicans will bring accountability back to Washington. We will investigate Dr. Fauci. We will repeal the 87,000 IRS army, and we will impeach Joe Biden. And if you scroll down to the just to the very first, you have the same comments on it. Talk is cheap. It better get done. And then the fourth one down there from somebody called Jerome Bell. Just like Kevin and the rest of the never-Trumpers did in 2016 to 18, when we controlled both houses and the presidency.
Yeah, I'm with them. I'm as cynical as them. But I don't see what... Well, convince me. Start to convince us. What is it that will make things actually move? Swamp draining, as Trump termed it.
Yeah, there's not going to be any swamp draining in that respect, I don't think.
Well then.
That's it. If the swamp isn't drained, then whatever, forget about it. I don't want it. No, it's. I think there's 20 of them, and obviously the Republicans have a majority of 10 in Congress and a minority of 1 in. The Democrats have a majority of 1 in the Senate. Anyway, in Congress, Republicans 10 majority. But there's a lot more than those 20 that were. That were the other day that caused the 15 different votes to try and get this guy McCarthy, who's a Republican congressman from I think 17 years, Republican congressman from California, who is nominally supposedly a kind of true blue Republican, whatever, supporter of Trump and stuff. But these 20 that voted against him repeatedly don't believe that, and there's good reason to believe that, I suppose. And that's why they're holding his feet to the fire, basically, and didn't vote for him repeatedly, forced a vote over and over and over again. And again, they were able to force it because the Republicans have a majority, a 10 majority, plus with their number, 15 or 20 of them, they were able to get enough people to not give him the majority that he needed, 218.
It was safe to have their protest because the Democrats would never get over the minimum threshold they needed.
Exactly.
They were consistent throughout. The Democrats always voted for this.
Right. And the Democrats,
Raheem Jeffries.
Right. And they would never vote for anybody but Jeffries. There's no way any Democrat is going to vote for any Republican, regardless of how much of a rhino, i.e. Republican in name only he is. They're always going to vote for it. In fact, historically, it would be very bad form for any Democrat to not vote for the person who is nominated by their party for the
That's why this vote for speaker should have been formality. It usually is.
Yeah.
This is decided at election time. As soon as you get a majority in the House, that's it. Everyone knows that they'll get the speaker.
And there's somebody nominated.
The hold-up was this inter-Republican Party issue.
Yeah, exactly. And the media is presenting it as kind of, conflict within the Republican Party, etc. But it's not. It's the legacy of Trump, basically, whether you like it or not. And maybe a lot of people think that Trump was in for 4 years. It was a complete disaster. It was all a mess. It was Orange Man bad. He was, did all sorts of bad things. He was impeached twice, and it was just an aberration. It was crap, and nothing really happened during Trump's administration. Nothing of any significance. It was just an anomaly. He's gone now, and we can move on. That's not really obviously the case. Trump awoke the Kraken during those 4 years in administration. He awakened, at least amongst a significant number, and of course those 20 that were against McCarthy and stonewalling his nomination or his approval for Speaker. They are the ones who are standing up, but there's probably a significant number of other Republicans who are, to one extent or another, have been red-pilled by the Trump administration and emboldened in a certain sense to get back on board with historical or traditional Republican values. And these 20 that we've been talking about are the ones who are obviously up front and very committed to it. But there's a significant number of others who I think have been, like I said, kind of Republican red-pilled. And that is Trump's legacy, basically. And Trump still has a significant amount of influence. I mean, as much as the media presented this image that we all got of Trump, I don't think, it was so simplistic or so black and white amongst the actual political class, and obviously in particular the Republicans. And they were able to look beyond the Orange Man bad and see Trump and Trump's policies as, traditional, proper, accurate, good Republican policies and values that they, would be willing, I'd say, to get at least to move in that direction, to get back to traditional Republican values.
There's a lot of questions here. What are those? Because since 1963, it's a uniparty. The values are all the same. You're talking about something that goes back into
I don't know if it's
before the war, before World War II.
Well, no, I don't think it. I think the line I would draw would be where it became a kind of very decisively a uni party, effectively, between Republicans and Democrats. At least in terms of the effects on the world today and what we're living with today, was from 9/11 and after 9/11. The rise of the neocons, maybe just before 9/11, 9/11, the neocons, the Bush years, they're globalists, basically. They're the uni party. The neocons are the uni party, the war party, the imperialist party, the globalist party. Screw America. America is basically just the body that we leech from in order to expand our influence and control around the world, basically. And that obviously is very, very divergent from traditional Republican values, which, traditional Republican values, at least from an economic perspective, would be protectionist, economically protectionist in certain situations, and certainly since the Second World War, whatever, the 70s, 80s, 90s, America could afford, in a certain sense, certainly after yes, during the Cold War, but then in the 90s and into the 2000s, that's why the neocons rose, because there was no competitor. They could feel free and emboldened to spread themselves around the world because there was no peer competitors. But in the last 20 years, with the rise of peer competitors, all sensible, rational Republicans who haven't bought that uni-party, globalist, imperialist, or swallowed that pill, realise that the world they're in right now today is not the same world that they were in when that expansion of American power and influence around the world really, really took off after 9/11, in an aggressive kind of, pathological way. They realise they're not. The world is different. It has changed very quickly, and America is facing serious problems. Is looking down the barrel of a gun, basically, right now. And the only rational thing to do in America's interests is to go back to America first, basically. Make America great again, which was America first, make America great again.
Okay, so do what instead of what they're currently doing? Give me examples of what they're currently doing and what they would actually do instead. If Marjorie Greene Taylor's triumphant, can you put that tweet back up? She had a list of 3 things happening this year, as far as she's concerned. Well, she hopes. Well, in a generality, bring accountability back to Washington, okay? Investigate Fauci. Do you think that's on the cards this year?
Maybe. It does. It's not really that important. It's something that would appeal to their base or whatever, and appeal to, well, they're personally motivated to do it as well because, they want to go after the people that they don't agree with, who they think that was part of the whole Washington establishment. But a major thing, a major thing is like I've more or less been saying, is military expansionism around the world. That's obviously the main thing that I'm talking about.
Oh, so okay, impeaching Joe Biden, no,
Maybe.
okay, maybe, okay, but those things. So you think this is going to result in increase or lesser?
Well, less.
Less.
Obviously, protectionism, yeah. Make America great again. Build infrastructure at home. Stop throwing billions at countries around the world.
So Ukraine.
Financing foreign wars. Yeah, they're all quite openly against
funding Ukraine's war against Russia.
The funding that has been given to them and the funding and any future funding, they're very much against it. And part of the concessions that they got from McCarthy was... one of them, I mean, there's several concessions, whatever, but one of them was that Gates himself was demanding, the Florida congressman was demanding the chairmanship of key House Armed Services committees. There's many key House Armed Services subcommittees that deal with intelligence and military and Pentagon and all that kind of stuff, different aspects of it, but they didn't say which one they wanted. But they're focused on having much more oversight, essentially, over Pentagon spending and Pentagon action, and obviously that's all tied up with military funding to foreign countries.
And do you think the intelligence community, in quotes, is going to have to adapt to that?
Well,
they've been calling the shots since 1963. I mean,
but you have to remember that a lot of this stuff has to go through Congress, like it does go through Congress and is signed off in Congress, and no money goes anywhere, regardless of what the intelligence community wants. No money goes anywhere. The intelligence community may have their own money, but no public American tax dollars go anywhere until some kind of a bill is passed and signed off on by Congress. I mean, you shouldn't think of the intelligence community as like some kind of there is a overt government structures in America, and most countries do still play a part. They're not just a bunch of puppets who are pretending to go to work or pretending to have any power or influence. They do actually have the power and influence that they appear to have. But and of course that doesn't mean that intelligence communities don't lean on them and put pressure on and have all sorts of 6 ways from Sunday, as Chuck Schumer once said, to get at any politician. But they don't have. So it's essentially, at the very least, it would be set up for a battle in a certain sense between the two, which in itself would be a problem if it only delays it or hamstrings it, or whatever. Then that's still a problem, compared to right now, which have this open. Yes, everybody agrees, the free flow of let's support Ukraine to the last Ukrainian, give them whatever they want. Let's increase, let's. Escalate the types of weapons and the types of weaponry that's supplied to Ukraine, etc. Right now, it's open season basically. So anything that would come away from that would be a problem for Ukraine, especially since Ukraine right now is in a fairly delicate moment and almost an inflection point in a certain sense is brewing in Ukraine. So yeah.
So in summary, you think the more MAGA established, a Republican-controlled Congress with a large dose of MAGA, right? Mm-hmm. Even if they don't really believe it, but they're tied to it because of the influence of an important wing, a wing of them they'll need to pass votes to control committees to sign off on everything the CIA wants. Mm-hmm. Will have the overall effect this year going forwards for the remaining 2 years of this term of making the US much more isolationist. Mm-hmm. Like, markedly so. Like, we'll notice it. Mm-hmm. Ukraine, forget it. That's now off on its own, pretty much. Because
that combined
Ukraine,
with...
I say that in an extreme sense because Ukraine is 100% funded by the US government at this point.
But that combined with inherent problems within the Ukrainian conflict, and as far as it's going, how it's not going very well, let's say, for the Ukrainians. I mean, that's progressing day by day by day. That conflict is progressing. We can talk about it a little bit later, where that's actually at. But it's all There's a convergence of things that I see anyway happening right now. Within the next few months.
That would be less interference in European politics. For example.
Well, it could ultimately, through various different, steps, it could lead to the collapse of NATO. I mean, there's other things involved here where you actually have, because we'll talk about that when we talk about Ukraine. But there's a possibility of some sort of collapse of NATO, or the fracturing of NATO, basically, or the fall from grace, let's say, of NATO at some point this year as well.
And the elephant in the room, the actual competitor to American hegemony, China, they just sort of back away from that.
From what?
Yesterday, for example, they sent a U.S. warship to the Taiwan Strait. That shit's gone. Provoking China to force it to retake Taiwan, just like they forced Russia to move into Ukraine.
I don't.
Therefore, justifying
that was never going to happen. Like, if you look, I mean, China's been looking at what's happening in Ukraine, and it's probably predicted, that the Ukraine situation will come to an end probably at some point this year, with for everybody except the deluded Western media and the Ukrainian, NAFO types themselves, a Russian victory. But they're watching, the Chinese obviously are watching how, because it's, they can draw conclusions in a certain sense. It's not exactly the same situation, but you basically have Ukraine being used by America to threaten Russia. And in South China, in Asia, you have Taiwan being used in one way or another by the US to threaten China, with China threatening that if pushed, it would invade Taiwan, exactly the same way that Russia has said repeatedly, if pushed, I will invade Ukraine. So, there's a lot to be learned, at least in terms of from the overall dynamics by the Chinese, in terms of how, I suppose, just from the point of view of the resolve, let's say, they get a good idea of the resolve of the Americans for, behind the bluster, behind the talk, behind the rhetoric, behind the saber rattling, etc., what they would actually do, So the Americans were never going to have a war against China. They were always going to do exactly the same thing they've done in Ukraine, which was one thing they have been doing to some extent, was fund, arm and train Taiwan, and try and stop China from ever thinking about invading or going to the point of invading. But at the same time, antagonizing China, because the main problem for the Americans with China is economic. It's not necessarily military. It's economic. And this again gets back to Trump and his China, and China screwing us over economically, blah 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 blah. All the things. Look at all the things that Trump said, and if you can interpret what he's saying through his particular use of the vernacular, understand that what he was saying is actually true, and that these MAGA Republicans, basically in Congress, and many other Republicans, I think the same way, so that they may be this year also planning to introduce and have passed, hopefully, from their perspective, bills and policies that push back against China economically, that piss off China economically and sour the relationship with China.
Basically industrial sabotage, preventing fair competition.
Right.
It's no longer a fair free trade world.
Yeah. Basically, it's no longer a free trade world that America dominates. That's not the world we live in, like we were saying earlier on. They realize that's not the world they live in anymore, and that it's getting to if not already, it's getting very, very, very quickly to the point where it's every man for himself, every country for themselves. These people have to turn that ship of state, the American ship of state that was, certainly since, you could say since the Second World War, but certainly since the 1990s, had decided the world was its oyster. It owned everything. There was no competitor, and we can do whatever we want, and we can set up global trade in a way that benefits us, because they didn't really have any significant pushback from any country that was able to push back significantly, either economically or militarily. That's changed in the last 30 years since then in a big way, and that way of doing business, of seeing that you can just go around the world and have your say, have your way, is not possible anymore. And they're being screwed over. They're being challenged, so they have to readjust in order to continue to compete and to continue to service the American economy effectively and service the needs of the American people. Again, I mean, you have to allow that there's some, as cynical as you might be about people in members of Congress, that there are people who in Congress who actually are genuinely concerned about the country they live in and the welfare of the people, the welfare of the citizens in that country, and them as representatives of the citizens in government, tasked with making decisions that are to the betterment of the people, etc., infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. They want to do that in a genuine way. And the only way they have to do it is through
Will
through
they close
policy
any
bills.
of their 800 bases,
Well,
which are funded by
Maybe.
US dollar supremacy?
mhm.
Do they think they can just keep printing money and go
Yeah,
to
yeah.
trillions more debt? Or
Yeah.
is that part of the reality check? Because that's something Trump said, again, garbled through his vernacular, but
Mhm.
over and over and over, he said we can't just keep printing because
Yeah.
the dollars are going to come back someday.
Mhm. Yeah,
Do
there
you
are
think
people.
they're getting real to that?
I think a lot of them are. I know that very well. If you were to talk to anyone, they would probably totally agree with that. That's what Trump has said at that time, and what that's the reality right now. And they need to do something about it. They need to get real and get realistic, and they might want to admit it, but they have to realize or accept their new position in the world. That it's effectively they're already in a multipolar world. They should act as if they're already in a multipolar world to prepare for the actual inception of a multipolar world. You don't want to wait until a multipolar world is forced on you and suffer the consequences because you haven't prepared. So I think that's what they're thinking, that's what their thrust is, and it'll be, and they'll have to fight for it, and they'll have to, but they set it up this way, they saw this guy McCarthy as he's a Republican, he's the only one that we're going to get enough people amongst the rest of the Republican members of Congress to vote for, but we need to nail him to the wall, basically. We can't just let him as a kind of,
Business as usual.
business as usual,
Matt
lobbying
Gaetz says
interests,
he's the
all that
kind
kind
of guy who turns up to Congress wearing a Ukrainian lapel,
Right.
and he's known as Mr. Lobby Guy.
Right, exactly.
That's what they call him in Congress.
mhm.
He's such a sellout
Mm-hmm.
to moneyed interests, not his constituents who voted for him.
Yeah. So they have to pin him down. And that's why they had that one vote. One vote is enough to trigger a vote. One member of Congress can trigger a vote to remove him. And that's how they're pushing. They haven't released all the details, but I mean, there were many concessions that they supposedly exacted from him, which was primarily the membership or chairmanship of various different committees and subcommittees that effectively get to decide how bills are brought to Congress, which ones go on first, that have a significant influence on the types of bills that are brought to Congress when they're brought, and effectively that have a significant influence on the types of bills that are brought to Congress and which ones get passed, which is significant influence over making legislation that becomes law that has to be acted on, regardless of what the CIA wants. This officially is the law. This is a bill that has been passed, and therefore, if this bill says that no more money or less money is going to A, B, or C, somebody has to go through the motions at least of not paying that money out to A, B, or C like we have been all along. So that's assuming that it's not all just a facade and everything Congress does and all the bills they pass are completely irrelevant. That actually they can pass whatever bill they want, but things continue on as they were before regardless. I don't think that's the case. So, yeah. So that's basically what I mean in terms of making America great again. But of course, it's I'm not naive enough to think it's that it won't be very difficult for these people who want America to kind of restructure and reframe what America is and the way it acts and interacts with the rest of the world. That they're going to have a clean sweep type thing, that there will be a lot of pushback and a lot of dirty tricks and all sorts of stuff going on. It'll just descend into kind of chaos. But that in itself is part of the process, I think, of increasing political chaos and disagreement and lack of proper functioning of the American political system is part of making America great again. It's the part of the breaking down to remake. And it extends out then, because of America's influence in the world, to lots of other major aspects within the world, other major events or things that are ongoing within the world, like we mentioned, Ukraine and China. And then economically, obviously, they're already gone. They've gone far enough along the line of globalism that any major country that has, especially America, that has gets into financial difficulty, it has repercussions for everybody else. So
All right. So, yeah. Big changes afoot in 2023.
yeah, I think that's, anybody could say that. It's like you'd be like a broken clock. You're right twice a day type thing. If you just say stuff's gonna happen. But I think I'm just trying to flesh out a little bit more clearly, like the what I think is the general trends, basically. That there's going to at least be a significant fight within Congress, within the American political system.
There almost was, literally.
Yeah, over the direction of American foreign and, by implication, domestic policy, but particularly foreign policy, let's say, because it's through foreign policy that America services its domestic policy in a certain sense. It's America services its domestic debt by foreign through foreign policy.
And does this include deindustrializing Europe and plundering its
Well,
industry over?
They've already started to try
Is
and
Nord
do that.
Stream MAGA or globalist CIA stuff?
Well, Nord Stream would technically be MAGA, and would technically be approved by Trump. Yeah, it's like I said, it's every man for himself. Like it's
Right.
dog eat dog. It's whatever works. It's America first.
Right.
When there's a fight and it's for economic survival, there's very little that wouldn't be sanctioned.
Okay. Assassinations, covert ops.
Maybe, yeah. Except
rigging foreign elections.
Yeah.
So more the
Yeah,
same,
yeah.
but
except the people who do that traditionally were doing it in the interests of globalism and America's extending America's imperial reach. Like particularly intel agencies were the ones who would have been involved in assassinations and coups and all that kind of stuff. Also the State Department, obviously. But I don't think it extends to that, because that doesn't really necessarily help you. It's not like, I think it's more of a withdrawing from the world that you see, withdrawing from America into itself, and it not being liked by its allies, or the allies that it's had up until now, its NATO allies, particularly in other countries. As America kind of withdraws into itself, essentially, they won't be happy about it, because it's like, you made us dependent on you for such a long time, and now you're just dropping us. So yeah, and it's weird though, because the impression I got from Congress was that there wasn't much pushback. I think the Democrats are still the Democrats, but they seem to think that this guy McCarthy is, he's malleable enough. We can, we'll be able to control him in a certain sense. You know what I mean? Or maybe they've just decided that they're happy with the fact that Biden's in the White House. They have control of the Senate. Nothing big's going to change anyway, so we're not going to, because there's been very muted response to this whole, based on my analysis of the situation. There have been some, suggestions like or write-ups about it along similar lines type thing, but there's been very muted response from the traditionally, leftist media, CNN, etc., a muted response to what happened, where you had a gang of like people who are more Trump than Trump,
right,
and controlling, who, not just controlling who, well, not really controlling, but exerting that kind of influence over the Speaker of the House, who's second in line to the President, has a lot of power. Here you have a bunch of MAGA, basically Trump representatives, the long finger, the long hand of Trump, reaching out from Mar-a-Lago into the Congress and having a direct influence on American foreign and domestic policy. And I would have expected them to be apoplectic about that and to be screaming it from the rafters or the rooftops. But it was very muted, which I thought was strange. So it's almost like, I don't know, maybe there's somewhere in the bowels of Capitol Hill, there's been a message from whoever
well,
in the deep state to say, listen, just...
Well, that should scare ordinary pro-Trump Americans. The alignment of DC with MAGA is not going to be MAGA. It's going to be awful. That would be my first reasonable blink, would be like, it's gone, it's done for. But if, as you say, there is possibility for significant alignment of interests that actually do work in American people's interest, then
Yeah.
it's something to be happy about for them. For the rest of the world, not so much. But, you know,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting, but I looked at it yesterday and I thought, okay, we had a near brawl in the Senate.
Well.
And I thought it portended more to come. For years, videos have gone viral in the West, mocking and laughing at parliament brawls in those other countries where they don't have our beautiful system. And now an actual brawl came to pass right at the death, at the peak of on the last vote.
Well, it was one guy gesticulating at Matt Gaetz and just being pulled away. Like, it wasn't exactly, you know what I mean? It didn't really match up with. It couldn't compete with the kind of brawls you had in other countries, particularly Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries and stuff like that. You know what I mean? And McCarthy himself said that he didn't have any harsh words with Gaetz. You know, it was just some other dude who was supportive of McCarthy just got a bit angry at Gaetz for pushing it to 15 consecutive votes, basically. And for some reason, some guy that was with him grabbed him around the face. I don't know why he was going to grab him around. It's not like the guy was actually,
Maybe
swinging or something at him or whatever. He just was kind of like leaning in and pointing his finger. The guy grabbed him by the face and kind of pulled him back, whatever. But yeah, yeah, I don't know. We'll see, but yeah, I have to see how it pans out. It all depends on it. What I'm saying is that if it goes in that direction that I'm kind of saying, which is that it goes more towards American protectionism and that kind of stuff, if those kind of bills get passed and funding gets cut off for Ukraine, etc., and anti-China economic policies and laws are passed, whatever, sanctions, and other things like that. If you see America kind of like divesting essentially, and to a large extent divesting, but obviously it's going to keep its military base around the world for security and stuff. That's a bridge too far. But there's a lot that can be done short of that in terms of stopping spending large amounts, hundreds of billions of dollars of American taxpayers' money abroad, effectively, and instead spending it at home, and investment and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, economic policies where you steal industry from Europe. You blow up Nord Stream 2, and then you have a bill that says, an Inflation Reduction Act that provides hundreds of billions of dollars for investment in America by European companies. Subsidies to invest in America, where gas and oil is a lot cheaper compared to Europe because we just blow up Nord Stream pipelines. That's that makes economic sense. Yeah, if it goes in that direction, it'll be because, everybody's on board with it. And I don't know how everybody was ever not on board with it. I don't know. It was one of the abiding, puzzling things for me during the Trump era, how him talking, if you stripped away all the bullshit that they claimed that he was talking about and saw what he was actually saying, he was basically saying, spend money in America, invest in America, build up American infrastructure, build up American jobs, build up American industry. Who in Congress disagrees with that? Who can reasonably disagree with that?
The corporate overclass, Wall Street, because what are called MNCs, multinational corporations, are actually overwhelmingly American owned. Yeah. And they don't. For them, the United States is irrelevant.
Too expensive.
The profits come from everywhere,
the
world over. Some of their biggest profits come from China. Yeah. Some of the biggest profits in China come from Chinese state-owned companies, which I only discovered in December when someone, I forget his name, some economist, academic guy, gave an analysis. You're not going to believe this, he said. Since 2008, American MNCs, they're really ACs, they're American corporations. Their profits have exploded in their control of Chinese state-owned companies.
Or investment in them,
Wrecking China, for example. That's why there's always been that's the real reason why the Democrats have always been like, no, tone down the rhetoric on China, because we can't afford an economic. And whereas Trump's like, China, sanction them, they know that the Wall Street gets so much from China as it is. Why upset that apple cart? So
Yeah.
that's just one extreme example where there's. You ask, well, it seems illogical. Why do they not want to invest in America? Because they're investing in in anything in the world where hot money delivers hot profits.
Yeah, and America's just customer base for them, but that's not very responsible.
It's just a home base.
Yeah, it's a customer base. There's 320 million people who will buy stuff that's made abroad, that they haven't by companies abroad that they either own or have invested in, who are then making products and selling them to the world, including to 320 million Americans. So it's a customer base. And Trump's thing, broadly speaking, was, why is there not industry in America providing jobs in America and stability for America, long-term stability for America? Americans can't just be a bunch of customers. They have to be producing things for the GDP, for the health of the economy, etc., etc. And these guys are saying, no, well, that would be more expensive to do that in America. We have to pay higher wages, etc., etc. So we prefer to do it abroad where it's cheaper and we can make them cheaper and get more money, make more profit. So yeah, but I know that's the rationale behind it, but I know that's the reality behind it. But on the face of it, I was surprised how so many people in Congress could get away with trashing that idea, because it makes sense if you're an American. It makes sense economically from an American, internal economy point of view, but not if you're a multinational corporation, i.e. multinational being your American company that just operates multinationally and extracts profits from around the world. But yeah, if it goes in that direction, I mean, obviously it'll be pushback from them, but if it goes in that direction, it'll say to me that that there's a reality in a certain sense setting in that America can't compete in the same way that it competed in this globalist kind of way. It can't compete. That America will fall into ruin if it does not change course, basically, towards a more traditionally Republican, protectionist economic policy, which means it goes to war with lots of countries that it formerly was. And I don't mean war, military, I mean economic war with other countries, including China. And if that happens, then it'll be just more belligerence, and China will decide, based on those economic factors, China might decide, well, ultimately, if one of the factors directly involves Taiwan and the importance of Taiwan and chip manufacturing, etc., for China, then China will be more likely to just say, okay, listen, we're going to take over. We're going to go into Taiwan, basically, and take control of Taiwan. So it won't be from a military perspective; it'll be from an economic perspective that China would invade Taiwan in response to American Republican economic aggression against China, which they're planning to do, which they've said that they're planning to do. These 20 this group of 20 Republicans, MAGA Republicans, supposedly they're hoping with the support of many other Republicans, possibly a majority to get bills passed. They're planning to do that. They've tabled that already as we're going after China. We're going after Biden, we're going after China, we're going after Ukraine, we're going after military spending around the world, blah, 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 blah. They say that anyway.
Yeah, there was interesting footage of Gates and others, Paul Gosar, having very civil. We couldn't hear what they were saying, but we could observe them chats with AOC, other members of the squad. The far lefty, liberal, ultra liberal types in Congress, and you could see they were just discussing things. We're on the same team here. Let's work out a deal.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of ties into Ukraine. The Biden administration obviously there's still the enduring kind of like support Ukraine to the last Ukrainian, and they've tabled a new tranche of, weapons supply, which supposedly possibly will be getting there around maybe in the next couple of months. It doesn't sound very significant. They're talking about Bradley fighting vehicles. There's no, they can't really supply. They talk about tanks and all that kind of stuff, but the limits of NATO, American and NATO ally, the limits of their commitment to actually supporting Ukraine in a way that it would enable Ukraine to actually win, quote unquote, win this war against Russia. the limits are very clear and have been for quite a long time. You know, it's kind of drip, drip. They're sending them artillery shells, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, howitzers, basically artillery and artillery shells. They're not really sending very much in the way of tanks, which they would have to, and they don't have the tanks that they can send to compete with the number of tanks that Russia has. We're talking now about Patriot missile, anti-aircraft, you know, missile defense systems, which again, their effectiveness is in doubt. Their effectiveness is in doubt since the first Gulf War, when they weren't able to shoot down an awful lot of Iraqi Scud missiles. Of course, they've been updated and all that kind of stuff, but still, there is target practice essentially for the Russians, you know. So there isn't any sign. They keep sending enough to keep the war going, but all they're really doing is sending enough to keep Ukraine supplied with the bare minimum, the basic military equipment necessary to keep fighting, pushing back against the Russians, but not to win. And the Russians are slowly but surely wearing them down, and particularly the manpower that the Ukrainian military personnel is seriously depleted at this point. There's lots of videos coming out on Ukrainian kind of Telegram channels and stuff like that, where they're going around
basically abducting.
There's
people
evidence
off
of
the
them,
streets.
it's the Ukrainian mobilization, which is grab people off the streets and
Teenagers.
take them and throw them to the front. Maybe we'll just look at a little map here to see where what the situation in Ukraine actually is. See if you can throw that up there, Scotty. It's hopefully it'll work. It's a long kind of Google URL, but it's a Google Ukraine control map. Main thing, if you just, is that all of Ukraine? That's good. That's all Ukraine. Yeah. Some basic things to understand that I don't think a lot of people have really understood about this conflict in Ukraine. Since there was talk of, or expectations that Russia would just within a few days Russia was going to take Kiev, and what was it going to do? It was going to like carpet bomb all of Ukraine. A country that's bigger than France. It was just going to carpet bomb the whole country or something and win bigly, like America did in Iraq.
3 days.
Well, or even after 6 weeks. Wasn't it after 6 weeks in the 2003 Iraq war that Bush declared mission accomplished, and then it dragged on for another 10 years? Obviously just silly, propagandistic nonsense takes on how wars actually happen. But anyway, some basic points is that we've talked about this before, but Ukraine was being prepared since 2014 after the US-backed coup in Kiev in 2014. The Ukrainian military was being prepared for the past 8 years for a conflict with Russia. Not at Russia's instigation, not that Russia was planning to do it itself, but rather that NATO and Ukraine had decided, we're going to build up a military sufficient enough to attack Russia, to try and take back Crimea or do whatever. One of the problems with so that line, the blue line, all the blue markers are Ukrainian, and red is Russian military. Obviously, Ukraine. If you have an army, you put most of your army. In this case, they had to put most of their army to deal with the size of the Russian force that was invading. You have to put it in contact with the enemy, right? You can't just put a small amount, 10 or 20% of your military forces against the enemy and keep all the rest back in major cities, because, well, then the small amount that you put in contact with the enemy will just be overrun and they'll just proceed. So you have to put most of your forces along the contact line, which was always, and again, they dug in along that, along the border of, more or less the border of Donetsk and Luhansk. The Ukrainians had dug in there going back several years and with all sorts of fortifications for that kind of a conflict. So the deciding factor here will be, over the next weeks and maybe a few months, will be the extent of the majority of the Ukrainian forces in blue there along the contact line of the Russians, how much they're degraded and how many are left. Because the other blue envelopes there are usually brigades, I think. Click on one there, Scotty, on top left or something like that. Yeah, brigades. Brigades are made up of battalions, maybe 3 to 6 battalions. A battalion's maybe somewhere between 3 and 1,000 men. So you're talking about a few thousand at most in each of those areas. The vast majority of what remains of the Ukrainian military, maybe, I don't know exactly, nobody really knows, because that's obviously a fairly closely held secret, but the actual numbers of soldiers left, because if there's no soldiers left, Ukraine falls, by definition. If there's no soldiers left to man those artillery and to push back the Russians just spread across the country and Ukraine is done. So it really, the decisive point here is what happens along that control line where the red and the blue are in contact with each other, and in particular areas along it, there's battles going on right now. I don't think we need to get into the specific details, but if over, depending on how things go, if over the next few days even, but probably weeks, that front line basically, along with the blue and the red meat, if the Ukrainian military collapses, and it may collapse along that line, then it's more or less done. There's a bit of cleaning up to do and stuff, but it's more or less done. And that, of course, depends at this point. The Ukrainian military's ability to continue fighting is entirely dependent on weapons supplied from the West. There's been a lot of, you see the 3 or 4 or 5 envelopes up there in Belarusia. There's been a lot of training going on over the several months. A lot of the mobilization of troops from Russia declared late last year. A lot of them have been sent to Belarusia, and there's a lot of preparations going on in Russia with the assumed intention of an offensive down from Belarusia to cut off resupply from the West, because from the left there, all of the resupply for Ukrainian military is coming from the West. So Russia seems to be, following a kind of, at this point, and preparing for a two-pronged strategy. Basically, one is to continue to degrade Ukrainian forces in the east to the point that they're not really able to do much anymore, and at the same time prevent any further resupply from the West through, and we'll have to wait and see, but through an incursion, basically an offensive down from Belarusia into northern Ukraine to cut off key transport corridors, so that anything left, the troops that are left in the Ukrainian troops left in the east are really screwed, in the sense that not only are they degraded in terms of actual numbers, but they have very little in the way of equipment actually
resupply,
to do anything with. And when that happens, that's a big blow.
It could end quickly.
Yes, it could. It does. It drags on. It's slow grind, but then it gets to a certain point where within a few weeks it dramatically changes. And that's the way all wars really happen, There's a certain point where, an inflection point where it just kind of like swings in the opposite direction, and that's it,
Well, the ever hopefuls in the West are suggesting that point would be, oh look, it's a stalemate. Nobody won. But that's fantasy land, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. There's no way.
What about these 200,000 Poles? When are they being sent in?
Poles, the whole Polish thing is funny. I mean, NATO, there's a chance that NATO would get directly involved if there was if the Russians include if they come down from Belarusia and their intent is to attack and stop supply lines from the West, which originated in Poland for the most part. There's a chance that there could be some exchange, direct contact between NATO forces in Poland, and there could be some missiles fired into Poland at staging areas for resupply just over the Polish border. But in that case, I mean, NATO, it's actually, like we said that previously, I've thought it often, and it's true that, and I've told people that, depending on the type of news, but for a lot of the news, especially the propaganda coming out from governments in the West and stuff, you can turn it on its head. The truth is actually much closer to exactly the opposite of what they're saying. So all the talk about NATO being strengthened and NATO alliance and NATO loyalty and NATO cohesion being super strong and all this kind of stuff, that is going to be exposed as a complete, the massive farce and lie that it is, if it ever gets to the point if it happens where there's direct contact between NATO forces and Russia,
Yeah, well,
they will collapse. They will. I mean, there is no cohesion in NATO at all. The opposite of what they say.
yeah, this great war in Europe this last year has actually been a great splintering of NATO. And
Right.
we won't see that properly. But in the meantime, we have plenty of Viktor Orban last week. He completely groks the war party issue. Have a listen. I think it's subtitled. This is just a clip from his speech, half a minute, where he's, I suppose he's speaking in Hungarian, so he's explained to a home audience, but he probably intends it for everyone in Europe to hear it. If you're sending weapons to Ukraine, you're part of the war. It's going to, there is no middle ground. This pretend middle ground we've had is phony.
Európa nagy része már benne van ebben a háborúban, belesodródott. Aki fegyvert szállít, az benne van a háborúban, legalább bokáig. Aki az egyik hadviselőfél katonáit kiképzi, az benne van térdig. Aki nem csak a katonákat képzi egyénileg, hanem még műveleti, tehát irányítási képzést is ad, az benne van kötésig a háborúban. Ha pedig az egyik hadviselő felett teljes egészében finanszírozza most már nem csak a hadikiadásokat, hanem az állam működését is, mint hogy az Európai Unió teszi most 18 milliárd euró erejéig, az fügyig van benne a háborúba. Nagyon remélem, hogy nem keveredik bele Európa nyakig ebbe a háborúba. Magyarország minden esetre kívül tudott maradni mindezen, és fönn tudta tartani a nagy nemzetközi nyomás ellenére is azt az álláspontját, hogy azonnali tűzszünetre, azonnali béketárgyalásokra és békére van szükség.
Yeah. That is 100% antithetical to NATO/EU position. Yet the country remains nominally in both, but it's, in terms of physical actual actions, it's doing the opposite. So there's others too, of course. Germany is, John Bolton wrote an op-ed in the British Telegraph.
Soon to be President Bolton.
Yeah, he wishes. He completely castigating Germany, That's been happening all year, though. That wasn't the first time that they started calling Germans, the same kind of insult they used to give France, collaborators, so on. So Germany's actual actions are mixed, It's mostly virtue signaling to the party line that we're involved in this war, but they're not in the way they could be.
Yeah.
So the fracturing has already taken place. This last year has already been the fracturing of NATO. All that remains is the coup de grace, the official acknowledgement of it.
The official acknowledgement of it would be that if NATO was attacked, a NATO country was attacked,
And nothing happened.
and Article 5 is triggered, and everybody goes, I have to go. I've got a meeting. See ya.
Well, flesh it out first for people. If something like that happens, there's going to be a month or so of hysteria, and it's going to sound like NATO is stronger than ever before. It's stronger than it was last year squared. It's going to sound really, really like NATO is super solid. And then there's going to be
Crickets, yeah.
crickets, nothing.
Mhm.
And it's over. Okay, what about Kosovo? Serbia, Kosovo's heating up. Is that just like a throwaway, kind of like we're on our way out, but here we're going to stir another fire here on the way, or something?
Well, if NATO was to kind of collapse and stuff, then you find the Kosovars would be suddenly go very silent as well, with Serbia growling down at them. Their courage only comes from the support they get from NATO countries.
They're
But
the
if
largest American base in Europe,
Yeah.
Bonsteel,
Yeah.
in Kosovo.
Yeah.
And their statues to Hillary and Bill Clinton.
Mhm.
They won't be worshipping at those
Exactly.
anymore in Pristina. Yeah. Okay. The Russians claim today that the Russian MOD says that they killed in one strike over 600 Ukrainian soldiers sleeping in some facility in Kramatorsk, and that it was a, quote, retaliatory strike for the Makeyevka strike in Donetsk last week that killed. They revised the figure. They said 89. The Ukrainians claimed they killed 400 Russian mobilized in one go, but
Yeah, they always exaggerate it, but yeah. That's an example, you lose 600 soldiers in one day in one strike, and it's like, how many have you got left, really, Yeah, it's
Well, are the European elites just complete? Are they just stupid to be so late to realizing this, or to still be virtue signaling to the party line when if it's really every man for himself? Are they just shocked deer in the headlights that they're still trying to come to terms with it?
well, it's. I'm not saying it's. What I'm saying is that the every man for himself thing is brewing basically. It's that's what's to come this year. It's not that way yet. They still believe the band's going to make it. You know that, and they're still they're immersed in their own particular ideologies and ideologies that they've been brought up in. You know, and it's a hard habit to change. You know what I mean? When you've been that's all you've known for your entire life type thing. It's almost inconceivable for them to imagine. Their fall.
Europe without America.
Yeah, their fall from grace. Basically, they can't imagine this. They just see it. That's just the jungle. The jungle takes over the beautiful garden, you know, and that's just inconceivable. And we'll do whatever is necessary to stop it happening. But what that translates down to is their own personal positions of power and influence that they don't want to see go. Basically, they don't want to see the loss of that, and that's what's implied. So they'll double down on everything and anything to prevent the future from happening, basically from reality from setting in. You know, it'll set in anyway. Reality will manifest anyway. But yeah, so they're all in for a big shock, you know, and for a bad time, you know. But don't expect any of them to wake up and smell the roses. Expect them to double down on bad ideas. And then whenever it really, when they can't avoid the reality, they'll just do the Homer Simpson thing and, you know, meld back into the hedge and say, see you later, whatever, you know, figuratively speaking, you know. They'll talk a load of nonsense and, you know, make excuses and blame everybody and everything other than themselves. It's not looking good. Putin spelled it out, you know, in broad terms about the change over to a multipolar world, and that implies serious chaos and destruction and collapse in different ways and forms, and that's what's on the agenda, and it's not being done by any one person in a certain sense, you know. If there's anybody to blame for it, it's the West, you know, for not readjusting, not accepting reality, and adjusting their positions to deal with that new reality, to align themselves with a new reality. They're pushing back, they're digging their feet in, and that just makes everything worse. That just makes a more chaotic scenario much more likely. So yeah.
Yeah.
Ascribing kind of rational intent to these people, it's just like, people are going to see just how irrational these people are. Eventually, people will realize just how irrational they are. Apart from, unless you say rational is self-interest, you know, but it's not even rational self-interest at a certain point. It's
you seem to be painting a very rational turn in American self-interest, that's what surprised me. I've had them as the most pathocratic and therefore the least likely to acknowledge reality. But you're suggesting overall that they are.
But they're going to be
reacting to a change in reality.
They are.
Reality creators can't see reality.
They are, but it's too late.
Even for the Americans.
Because, I mean, the idea of every man for himself, dog-eat-dog world, American protectionism and economic war and all that kind of stuff, they're going to lose that. America has only one future economically, and it's economic collapse. They're going to do their best to...
But I thought you said MAGA. No MAGA. They want to go for MAGA, but in lunging for it, it's going to collapse.
Because of the history because of where they are, because of how late they have left it, it's not possible. America has, and it's not their fault. It's what America has been doing for the past. I don't know how long you want to go back, but the last 80 years, if you want to go back 80 years, in terms of how it's set itself up as the world's policeman and all the policies that they enacted as a result of that, and not least of which is the massive spending of or printing of American dollars and all that kind of stuff. That the piper has to be paid one way or another, you know. And like I said, when we started talking about this, I said MAGA. When you eventually got me to explain it, was like, it was MAGA was making America great again. in terms of you see that your house is in a bad state of repair and you have to decide what to do about it. That's a bit too giving too much conscious intent to them, but the end result is that the house has to be knocked down and rebuilt.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got really shitty foundations, you can't patch it up. You know, you have to redo the foundations, basically. And that's what making America great again is all about.
Do you think other countries will help them in the process?
Help them go down.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll have to.
Will America
through
piss
the-
off the Chinese?
Yeah,
And
well,
the
that-
Chinese will join the Russians.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Chinese are already
They're pushing back.
in bed with the Russians, but I think that's what I was saying. A part of the in the Americans and the Republicans' attempt to, you know, protect themselves and to bolster their, you know, improve their economic outlook, they're going to have to go to economic war in a certain sense with other major countries, China in particular, and they're not going to win that war. You know, China will simply respond to that kind of aggression, and the end result. You know what I mean? It's like America's fundamentally weak, you know, and given the right conditions, that weakness will be exposed. So if someone who's fundamentally weak and doesn't realize it, and can't live with the idea of being weak, lashes out at someone else who's stronger than them, that person is fully entitled to punch in the face, and a weak person getting punched in the face collapses. No matter how great and strong they think they are, their inherent structural weaknesses will manifest when they get hit back. But again, they're in a difficult situation. They're in a no-win situation in that sense. They don't maybe realize that, but they'll find out that they're in a situation where there's no good option for them, really. Of course, you know, economic collapse doesn't mean that the whole country collapses into a hole or anything like that, you know, but it's a difficult situation, and it's not just for America, it's a difficult situation economically for the entire globe, you know, because of, like I said, the same reason that the causes of America's economic fragility right now are the same causes that mean that in the case where America has a serious economic crisis, the rest of the world does as well.
Yeah.
You know, the two are tied together, you know. It's kind of like the Samson option, you know. Not intended, but the end result is like, if we go down, you're going down too. Not because I want it to happen that way, but that's the way it's been set up. That's the way the global system is set up, you know.
Right.
Other countries will try and protect themselves against it, and they are already trying to protect themselves against it, particularly China and Russia. Other major countries, India, etc., are divesting from, you know, trading dollars, getting rid of dollars, buying more gold. So they all you just look at that and you see countries doing that and the extent to which they're doing it, and you realise that those countries, the people who are doing that in those countries, in those governments, obviously see something or smell something coming down the line. And it doesn't look good for America.
They no longer have full faith in the credit of the US dollar.
Yeah, and if you know, a tipping point arrives and enough countries buy into that and go along with that, then yeah, America's dirty laundry is exposed to the whole world to see, and the dirty laundry is stacked full of shitty, dirty dollars. Like, there's dollars, and they're all going back home, you know. And then the American economy contracts down to a realistic assessment of, you know, the value of the American economy, and that gets back to what Trump and others today see as the problem, which is the actual
Tangible worth.
The realistic value of the American economy is way less than
what it says
than
on
the currency
GDP statistic.
or the amount of dollars in circulation that in theory should be reflective of the value of the country. And the reason for that is, like you mentioned earlier on, is that so many nominally American or American companies who claim to be multinational companies, whatever, not investing in America, but instead putting all their operations overseas.
Derivatives to contracts that are overseas.
Exactly. And, you know, yeah. So it's not good. But we'll just have to see how it all plays out. Those are just the broad strokes. But how it plays out in the specifics remain to be seen. But even so, you can still kind of narrow down the specifics almost to likely scenarios, you know. Ukraine, one way or another, the Ukrainian military is going to collapse in the near future. I don't know how far extend it out, maybe till the summer. I don't know, give myself lots of leeway there and call it 6 months. It could be a lot sooner than that. But
yeah, the other wing in the US, the neocon, neo-lib wing, is adamant that that is existential for the United States, and their survival now depends on winning in Ukraine and Russia collapsing. Is that just ideological, or is there any grounds for? Is there reality to that too, for the reality creators?
Well, what do you call him? Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General,
yeah,
tied it to China. He said that if we don't win in Ukraine, then that will embolden China. China will see that it too can. You know, he talks in these kind of like, and it's kind of vague. It's not even vague. He talks in these oversimplistic kind of like missing the point or you know, manipulative terms, just like that. He says, if we don't win in Ukraine, if Ukraine doesn't win, or we don't win in Ukraine, if Russia wins, China will look at that and say, oh, Russia just took some land in Ukraine, I can take Taiwan. Yeah. And then they'll do it. So obviously it's much more complicated than that. That's not actually what's going on at all, but it highlights his thinking, you know?
It's the same as President Lyndon Johnson, 1968. He leans into the press who are asking these questions. It's fleshed this out for us. Why do we have to double down in Vietnam? And he says, if we don't stop the commies there, all these other little commie dominoes will fall. And he left it at that, and he was chuffed, you know. He thought that was enigmatic but clear. But the people were like, no, that still doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It made sense to him.
Yeah.
And the people behind and who think like him. Well, but it's exactly the same. There's no difference in there.
In thinking. Thinking hasn't changed, no. Exactly. I mean, realistically, what happens is if Russia, you know, defeats the Ukrainian army, and you know, establishes a peace or surrender terms or whatever, terms of surrender in Ukraine, that mean, you know, Russia is, you know, has won basically and dominates the future of Ukraine and dictates the future of Ukraine. Psychologically, it's a big blow for the West and NATO who stake their claim on we're going to push back Russia. But the reason they're not even pushing back against Russia. They initiated aggression against Russia because they realized that Russia, the growth of Russia and the development of Russia and in league with other countries like China and, you know, other the rest of the not international community, the rest of the world, they realized that was a problem, and that down the line that was going to be a problem for American hegemony in the world. So Ukraine is definitely a key point for them in terms of putting Russia in its place. There's a big part of that psychological in a certain sense. You got defeated, you lost, you know, and then the implications of the problems back home, psychologically among the population. Oh, we lost in Ukraine, etc. You know, it emboldens the West and reestablishes
Russia back a generation.
Reestablishes the West authority and all that kind of stuff, and does the opposite if they lose. You know, so they talk in those terms because it is partly psychological, but there is a practical aspect to it as well, where the rest of Ukraine that Russia isn't even in now becomes, you know, there's a new government that's allied effectively in one way or another with Russia. All of Ukraine's resources, all the, you know, it's the kind of the wheat and the sunflowers.
Becomes another Belarus. It joins your Asian Union and stuff like that.
Tangibly, Russia is more powerful. It has more GDP. It has more bigger population, and it has more influence then, and imposes more of a threat in a certain sense, but not in a malevolent way, but just simply through its influence and power. It gets to have more influence over or with European countries. So European countries, Western European countries, then after Russia wins in Ukraine, become more amenable to what Russia wants and doing the business with Russia. Nord Stream 2 gets fixed, blah, 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 blah. And that's all super bad for America, you know. It's part of the reason they blew up Nord Stream 1 and 2, you know. And also, you know, it cements and the increase in Russian influence and power with Europe also implies, an increase in Russia's ability to dictate its vision of its multipolar world vision, where America is down the totem pole where it belongs. It increases China's influence and power and control. It's all bad, because it's only bad when you come from the position of I have to rule the world. I have to dictate terms to everybody. Everybody has to do more or less what I say. Anything that eats into that and diminishes your influence to do that is bad for you.
Because you can no longer do it.
Yeah, well, it's economically.
Anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you take a hit to your credibility, your reputation, and it eats into your economic influence and ultimately your currency, the purchasing power of the value of the American currency. All sorts of different implications. But that's just a natural order that's establishing itself, like Putin talks about, of a multipolar world. The world should be multipolar, of course. You know what I mean? I mean, you've got this. It's kind of like diversity,
Or democracy.
Yeah, well, you can almost interchange multipolar and diversity. Diversity means not just differences, but equality or equity, equal rights among the diverse. Right? That's what America is all about. Supposedly, the Biden administration loves diversity. Why not in the globe? Although it's a different kind of a diversity. It's diversity. Essentially, according to Putin, it's diversity or multipolarity based on the innate influence and power and strength that any given country has. You know what I mean?
It's an interesting quirk of how this has all happened, that as this multipolar system was developing and beginning to take effect over decades, in that time span, Americans and British especially, Westerners more generally, interpreted those reality signals completely differently. And you've ended up with this whole woke thing.
Yeah.
It's like diversity, democracy, equity. Yeah. Here's our version of it. And it's completely mangled Frankenstein, which isn't the one that reality is signaling to them.
Yeah.
It's a horrific ideological cover for, in fact, more of the same.
Right. More control.
Domination, aggression, psychopathy.
Right. It's a weakening of the inherent, that whole idea of diversity and all the lefty woke stuff that's trying to be exported around the world by the West, in particular America, has the natural effect of weakening the innate kind of cultural, social, religious identity of any given country and homogenizing it all. And by weakening those aspects within that country, you weaken the country. Because a country derives its strength from its sense of national identity, national culture, the people. Because ultimately, the war in Ukraine right now has been fought by Russian men, Russian citizens, who are fighting, at least partly, under the belief of they're Russians, they have an identity, it was under attack, and they're protecting their homeland, they're protecting something that's unique, that's theirs. That attempt to remove that uniqueness and homogenize, or a pan culture, a pan, at least, maybe it's not even, it's new, but it is homogenous. It's like everybody should do this. Everybody should do diversity. Everybody should do, what are the other terms? Transgenderism. I don't know.
Open society.
Open society, all that
George
kind of
Soros
stuff.
would say.
And attacking the cultural foundation of many countries, undermining the culture. I mean, how more explicit do you have to be, or what better example of undermining at least part of a country, a very basic part of most countries so far in history, countries' culture, how much more explicit is in attempting to undermine that is the idea of spreading the idea of men and women are no longer men and women. Women aren't the only ones who can have babies. Men can have babies too. The male-female family and children is just an old, archaic, out-of-date idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's attacking the very foundation of what people have, for millennia, human society has been based on. So it is an attack that, to the extent that whoever's attempting to spread that around the world, it rightly should be seen and is being seen in some countries anyway, most notably Russia, as an attack on our country. and attempt to weaken us so that you can dominate us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my roundup
Okay.
for the new year.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you ever hear of Operation Unthinkable?
No.
It's just a 3-page document. It was published. It was secret for years, but the British National Archives published it in 1998. nationalarchives.gov.uk. Operation Unthinkable. It was a report from British military leaders to Winston Churchill on the chances of, quote, Operation Unthinkable, a surprise attack on the USSR, 22nd May 1945. So Victory Day was but 2 weeks old, and Churchill, it wasn't just given to Churchill. Churchill wanted a feasibility study. He was his brainchild. He thought, while we have momentum, let's go smash Russia. Let's go do what Hitler couldn't do. These assholes
Against our ally.
These assholes didn't just come up with it quickly afterwards. Throughout the war, their allies, they were like ideologically aligned with Hitler.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, you look at the history of the American
States.
20th century is the same as
This is something that you never see stated anywhere, but it's what is implicit in the entire Russiagate, Russophobia bullshit of the last decade. Object, it's in this document. The overall or political object of Operation Unthinkable is to impose upon Russia the will of the United States and British Empire.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen that written anywhere. You'll never see them really say, even their Anne Applebaum's, Russia must die, sure, but she never says what our mission is to impose our will on the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
It was once stated, with Berlin still smoldering, they thought, let's go for it now.
Well, when they're weak, right? They just lost 20+ million people fighting and defeating effectively the Nazis. So let's get them when they're down, you know.
It doesn't mention nuclear weapons, but it talks about America's military advantage and technological advantages. And they were thinking, before the Ruskies get this, let's, kumbaya, let's just blow up the whole Soviet Union.
Stalingrad wasn't Stalingrad, Pennsylvania, you know. It was Stalingrad, Russia. You know what I mean? The Americans, at the end of the Second World War, the Americans, there hadn't been one, apart from Pearl Harbor, which was in Hawaii, there hadn't been one bomb dropped on the continental US, you know? You look at Europe and it's in ruins, America's like, so we're doing pretty good over here. We didn't, only lost a few 100,000 soldiers, whatever. Russia lost 20 million. Cities in ruins. They just defeated the Nazis. Let's get them. We're in good shape. Yeah. But
they chickened out. The report says why. It's just a little bit too risky, because as much as the Russians are dependent on manpower rather than technology, like us, they were scared of them. They were just a bit too scared of what they saw in countering Hitler's armies in the march across Europe. So it tipped the balance, but it just shows you the mindset of these people. Like, that's what they would have. That's their ideal. They couldn't quite. They didn't quite step over that line then, and they won't today. Of course, I'm not bringing this up to suggest Operation Unthinkable is something that could happen here. But these people do think the unthinkable all the time. It's what drives everything they do and say, which are ideological covers. The unthinkable, what you and I would not think about, they think about every day. Every fucking day. They wake up and they think about assassinating Putin or wiping Moscow off the face of the earth, that kind of thing. And so that's when you have that mentality. Well, maybe they'll have to acknowledge reality of a multipolar world, but they're going to go down screaming.
Yeah,
the hysterics are going to be.
They're going to go down screaming, and structurally, they have no choice but to go down screaming in a certain sense. The imposition or the creation or the development of the natural development of a multipolar world implies some serious economic and structural whatever readjustment of America. You know what I mean? So it's not even if they didn't oppose it, even if now they tried to adjust themselves to it, it still implies a significant amount of pain for America and the West in general, the international community that are particularly tied together and that are still, you know, thinking the band's going to make it, and still not. Even countries that aren't really they're ideologically tied to America, but they're not physically. They're ideologically and economically tied to America to a large extent, but they're not total. They're not like America in that sense. They're not inseparable. So like European countries could at this point still try and take action to mitigate the extent of the extent of the impact that they're going to feel because of their ties to America. They could reduce those ties going forward, but they won't do it because they're ideologically driven.
Instead, France goes from being a net exporter of energy for decades.
Mm-hmm.
It has too much. It has nuclear power. It's got a surplus. Everyone around it buys it, electricity off France, to not having enough.
Yeah.
So they're taking actions to willfully self-sabotage. Is that for America? That's for greening the planet.
Yeah. You have to get into a conspiracy theory here. And to explain that, you have to go beyond just the nuts and bolts overt stuff to a conspiracy theory, which is that these people know that things are going to. There are certain people anyway in positions of power in Western governments, etc., and beyond them, that know that they know that something bad is coming down, and they're preparing for that kind of a collapse and social chaos, and they're trying to prepare the population for it in advance by
tightening their belts.
Tightening your belts, getting you accustomed to less, and coming up with reasons and explanation as to why this is happening, to reduce social chaos, to reduce and very likely anger and protest and
so that they don't go from the shock,
bringing back the guillotine.
Right. So they don't go from the shock of a normal life to
controlled
chaos,
controlled demolition, basically.
Okay.
That's where, I mean, at least with the Green New Deal or the Green Agenda and all that kind of stuff, the greening of the economy, they know, everybody knows, everybody who has any sense knows that there's no way you can run the world
on wind power,
on wind and solar power the way it has been run. You can transition to wind and solar power, but a lot of people are going to die. A lot of people are going to starve, and by a lot I mean 50% of the population or more, and they know that. So how do you explain why they're pushing ahead with it? And it's not even like they're not putting it off 50 years.
It has to be by 2030 for some reason.
Yeah,
it's very urgent.
They're doing it now. Like it's like straight away. They talk. I mean, China people are still lucid enough to talk about it. Like there's no way. Elon Musk said it, and other people have said like there's this whole solar wind stuff. Yeah, maybe you can transition partly to that or whatever, but it's always going to be very vulnerable, obviously, to the weather, and it's
not reliable.
And not reliable. So
Musk says you need nuclear. Well,
yeah,
of course.
Yeah,
and the powers that be know that.
Right,
but they don't build them.
Right, but they tell the people to act as if you're going to go green. Right, you start putting solar panels on your house, and there's going to be electricity shortages and electricity cuts, etc., etc. But you ask the question, why are there going to be electricity shortages? And it's like, well, because we're transitioning to green energy. Right, we're shutting down our solar, our nuclear power plants. We're cutting off gas and oil. That's why. It's like, so why are you cutting off gas and oil? Because the planet is being destroyed by it. No, it's not. Certainly not by nuclear power, and certainly not by gas. In fact, it's not. It's obviously nonsense. So there's another agenda at foot there, but it gets very murky. And like I said, you have to get into some kind of. You have to go where the evidence leads in a certain sense, or where it's what it suggests. You have to come up with a plausible narrative or plausible explanation as to why these people are doing this, knowing that it's going to involve
a lot of pain and social upheaval.
You're going to destroy the economy. Why are you pushing ahead?
And risk having guillotines and revolutions.
Yeah. Why are you pushing ahead with destroying the economy? But why do you want to destroy the economy? Forget about your narrative and all that kind of stuff. I know you give me all these reasons how the economy won't be destroyed, but it quite clearly, if you model it out, it is going to be destroyed. So why are you doing it? Can you just tell me that that's what you're going to do? Can you just admit it, that that's what you're going to do? You're going to destroy the economy, and then maybe we'll get to the reasons why? No. That's only in the holiest of holies. That's only after a good paddling and lying in a coffin for a while.
No doubt the sickles. Okay, any interesting comments there today, Scotty?
Let me look back.
That's why Hess flew to Britain, indeed. If he did, I'm not sure about that. What you can say for sure is that that's why the Panzer divisions stopped for 3 days and let the cream of the British army escape from Dunkirk before they turned around and planned to go east. Somebody's got to speak. Someone's going to speak out. Someone in King Charles now, his royal court, who knows what he really thinks and why he's like, we must do it now. They can't all stay silent, can they?
They're doing a pretty good job of it so far.
What was that video recently of a CIA guy saying that by 2027 it's coming down? What was the it he was referring to?
He didn't actually say something big.
Again, it's always a
I
bleak.
think he said China. Oh, but worse, obviously the implications of some kind of a major confrontation with China implies economic foobar. I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. Anyway, I think that's all the summing up I can do. Or I can take, rather. Have you got any more
You've
tidbits?
got a lot more conspiracy theorizing, but you're going to
No.
say you're going to dole it out, cautiously over the year.
Bit by bit, yeah.
Yeah.
As it reveals itself, we'll be able to talk about it a bit more. When it's the only thing that really makes any sense anymore. When all the other narratives have fallen away because that doesn't explain it. It's only when people are ready that you tell them what's going on, so you just have to wait. Reality will do its bit. Anyway, yeah, so we'll leave it there for this week, folks. Thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting, guys. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to smash all the buttons. We'll be back next week with another show on more of the same, whatever's been going on. Until then, stay tuned and have a good week. See ya. Bye.
Thanks for watching. Bye all.
Can't stop the signal, Mel.